My daughter said she changed the locks because I fell in rehab and it frightened her. The invoice said she ordered them on January 5th. I didn't go under anesthesia until January 16th. I didn't fall until the first week of February. That's the whole thing, right there. It took me most of an afternoon to understand what it meant. I learned it standing on my own porch. 68 years old, 5 weeks past a knee replacement, 1 canvas bag, 1 evening's worth of pills, no charger, no coat. Marissa said the downstairs bedroom was hers now and asked the transport driver whether he could take me back where I came from. Under the itemized lines, the invoice noted that the owner was relocating permanently. Nobody had said that to me. I'd have remembered a sentence like that. When she passed my mail through the gap in the door, a card came loose from the folder under her arm. A notary appointment. Beneath it, stapled pages. My name typed at the top. The signature line still empty. I checked the county record before the van left my driveway. 1 name on the deed. Mine. Then I remembered a check I wrote 9 years ago and never mentioned to anyone, and how good it had felt to be needed that way. The van had dropped me at 4:20 on a Thursday, in that gray Tacoma light that isn't quite rain and isn't quite anything else. The driver's name was Ellis. He carried my bag up the walk because the walk has 2 steps, and I was still slow on 2 steps. My knee ached in a bright, honest way the therapist kept calling progress. The door is red. My husband painted it the summer before he died, and every few years since, I've had it done again in the same color. I'd had my key out since the corner. 3 days I'd been thinking about that key, not the house, the key. It went in. It always goes in rough in cold weather. Then it stopped like it had hit a wall. I took it out and looked at it, which is what everyone does, as though a key could show you anything. I tried it again. Then I rattled the handle. And I'm not proud of the sound I made. A woman working at a door that wasn't opening for her. The hall light came on. Through the storm door I could see my living room. 2 moving boxes on the rug, taped, labeled in blue marker. My reading chair shoved against the bookcase with a bed pillow on it that wasn't mine. Marissa came to the glass in her socks. My daughter is 41, and she has a way of standing that tells you she has already finished the conversation. Mom, you're early. I told her I wasn't early. I was on the schedule. The same schedule I'd emailed her twice. The stairs aren't safe, she said. I'm not doing this again. I'm not getting another call that you're on the landing. I said I would like to come in and sit down. She said the downstairs bedroom was hers now. I want to be exact about this, because afterward a lot of people asked me what she said, and I could tell they wanted her to have said something monstrous. She didn't. She said it the way you'd read off a bus schedule. Then she leaned past me and asked Ellis whether he could run me back for the night, since they'd have a bed. Ellis looked at me. He was maybe 26. He had no idea what to do with his hands. She went and got my mail. That's the detail I keep coming back to. She thought of the mail. She opened the door 4 inches, and a rubber-banded stack came through. And because she had a folder under her arm, a card slipped out of it and landed on the mat between us. 10 in the morning. A notary's name I didn't know. And under that card, half out of the folder, a stapled set of pages with a heading in bold type and my name on the first line, and at the bottom a blank rule with my name printed underneath it, waiting. She picked the card up. She wasn't quick about it. She just picked it up the way you'd pick up a receipt. Then the door closed and the deadbolt turned, and I was standing on my own porch holding my own mail. The second envelope in the stack was from a shop in Lakewood called Sound Lock and Key. A paid receipt mailed to the service address the way those shops do. 2 exterior deadbolts, 1 entry set, 1 rekey of a garage side door. Ordered January 5th. Installed January 20th. I went into the hospital on January 16th. I read it in the van with the dome light on while Ellis pretended to study his phone. Down under the parts list there was a notes line, the kind a man types, so he'll remember which job he's on when he gets there. Owner relocating permanently. Deliver keys to daughter. I spent 31 years as the attendant secretary at Sherman Elementary. Take away the phone calls, and my whole job was noticing when one date didn't sit right beside another date, a missing signature. A parent's contact number that changed the week before the truancy letter went out. You learn that paperwork almost never lies about what it is. It only lies about what it's for. So I sat in that van and did the one thing my hands knew how to do. I pulled up the county assessor on my phone and looked up my own parcel. One owner, price, Eleanor M. There's a strange kind of comfort in that. Proof, at 8% battery, that a house belongs to you while you're sitting in its driveway with a bag on your lap. What came to me then wasn't a plan. It was a Tuesday 9 years back. A phone call at 10 at night, Marissa crying so hard she couldn't get the word repossession out in one piece. I was at the credit union when it opened. $1,106. I never told my sister. I never told Marissa's husband. I told myself I was buying my daughter a little room to breathe in. I bought something that morning. I'm still not certain it was that. Ellis wasn't supposed to take me anywhere but home, and home was the address on his clipboard, and the address on his clipboard had a deadbolt in it. He drove me to a motel on South Tacoma Way with a ground floor room and a walk-in shower, and he waited in the lot until I waved from the door. I hope somebody tells that young man he did fine. The room smelled like carpet shampoo. There was a chair by the window with one arm lower than the other. Here's what I had. 4 hydrocodone in a paper envelope, enough for that night and part of the next day. A phone at 4%, a cardigan, the clothes I'd worn out of the rehabilitation center, which were the clothes I'd worn into it. No charger, no compression sleeve, no bath bench, no list of my own medications, which was in the kitchen drawer under the takeout menus. I called the surgeon's answering service and a nurse called me back at 9:40. She was kind in the flat, efficient way of somebody working a nightline. She said she'd send a short refill to the pharmacy on Union, and she asked, twice, whether I had a safe place to sleep. I said yes. It was true, it just wasn't mine. The next morning I bought a charger, a toothbrush, and a package of underwear at a drugstore with a security tag on the shampoo. That was the worst hour of that whole spring, and I've thought about why. It wasn't the door. It was standing in that fluorescent aisle at 68 years old, doing arithmetic about a 3-pack of underwear, while my linen closet sat 4 miles away with everything I owned folded in it. I didn't cry in the store. I want that on the record. I cried in the parking lot, in a taxi, for about the length of one traffic light. Then I called the shop on the invoice. Sound lock and key is 2 bays and a counter in a strip off Bridgeport. The man who came out from the back was somewhere near 60, with reading glasses pushed up on his head. Dale Furness. I put the receipt on the counter and said I was the owner of that house, and I would like to know who had ordered the work. He didn't get defensive. That surprised me. He put his glasses on, went to a computer, and turned the screen partway toward me, which I don't think he was supposed to do. There was a work order dated January 5th. There was an authorization form, scanned, with a signature I have known since it was a child signature. Marissa Cole. Under relationship to property, she had written, in her own hand, authorized family property manager. There was a phone number that was not my phone number. And, in the special instructions field, the sentence that had been printed on my receipt, owner relocating permanently, deliver keys to daughter. She had a key to the house, he said. She had the alarm code. She said her mother was moving in with her and there'd been some trouble with a caregiver. He rubbed the side of his face. We do this work. Family calls, the parents going into care, they want the house secured. It's common. I said I understood. I did understand. That's what made it sit so badly. He printed me copies of everything, including the authorization form, and he wrote the install date and the technician's name on the back without my asking. Then he told me he wouldn't touch the locks that day. Not with somebody living in the house and a disagreement about who belonged there. He said it plainly and he was right. And he wrote down the name of a housing counselor on 6th Avenue, a woman he said had helped his aunt. I sat in my car afterward with the copies on the passenger seat and no ability at all to make them mean something smaller than they meant. Because here is what a date does. On February 21st, my daughter locked me out and gave me a reason. A fall. Stairs. Safety. Every word of it about a body that was still walking around a hospital gym in January, unfallen, unknown, entirely undecided. You can't build a wall in advance of the weather and then tell people it was the weather. Back at the motel, I went through the rubber-banded stack. Bills. A dental reminder. A pledge envelope from church. And a letter on heavy paper from a real estate office in Fircrest, thanking me for the opportunity, saying they hoped the market analysis prepared for my property on January 12th had been useful and would I like to discuss listing strategy in the spring. January 12th. 4 days before my surgery, somebody had walked my rooms with a clipboard while I was packing a hospital bag on my bed. My sister Ruth came to the motel on Saturday with a sweater, a bag of tangerines, and a position she'd clearly worked out in the car. Ruth is 71, 3 years older than me, and she has spent our entire lives being the one who says the hard thing first, so that nobody else has to. She sat in the chair with the low arm and looked around the room and said, "Well, this is grim." I said it had a walk-in shower. L. She put the tangerines on the table. She's being practical. That's all this is. She's frightened, and she's not good at frightened, and she did it the way she does everything, which is all at once and backwards. I told her about the order date. Ruth waved her hand, not unkindly. So she planned it. Of course she planned it. You don't get a locksmith out on an afternoon's notice. She leaned forward. Do you know what she said to me at Christmas? She said, I'm going to be the one. When it comes, I'm going to be the one who does it, and nobody's going to help me. She hasn't done anything yet, I said. She's doing it now. We went around like that for a while. Ruth is not a cruel woman. She's a tired one. She nursed our mother for 2 years in a house with 1 bathroom, and she has never entirely forgiven the rest of us for how that went. And I think when she looked at Marissa, she saw a younger woman about to lose the same decade she lost. Before she left, she said the thing that stayed with me longest. She said, nobody's shocked, Elle. That's the part you should sit with. Not one person in this family is shocked, because they all knew. They knew the way you know the weather. At Thanksgiving, I'd said it myself, out loud, with a serving spoon in my hand. Someday this is all going to be Marissa's anyway. I said it to be generous. I said it the way you'd hand somebody the last roll. After Ruth left, I sat on the end of that motel bed and did what I do, which is make a list. 9 years ago, the car. $1,106. The year after, her business license, the deposit on the van, and a website from a man in Olympia who never finished it. A little over $2,000. The spring she lost the 2 big accounts, 3 months of rent so she wouldn't have to tell her husband. $3,100, and I asked her not to tell him, which I have never once been able to explain to myself. A tax bill. A storage unit that had gone to auction with Sophie's crib in it. Last April, a payroll gap. $1,200 sent by app at 11 at night with a heart emoji because she'd sent one first. 6 times if you count the way I count. A little over $22,000 if you add it the way a bank would. Not one repayment plan. Not one conversation where I asked her what she was going to change. I never even asked to see the numbers because asking would have looked like doubting, and I was terrified of looking like a mother who doubted. I gave her a key. Then I gave her the alarm code. Then I put her on the utility account so she could deal with an outage while I was in Yakima, and I never took her off, because taking her off would have been a statement. There's a version of love that is really just a long apology for something you can't name. I had been writing mine for 30 years. On Monday, I called Tacoma Public Utilities to make sure the bill was still coming out of my account. The young man read back the contact information on file, the way they do, to confirm he had the right person. The phone number he read to me was Marissa's. I asked when that had changed. He clicked around and said the account contact was updated on January 8th. He asked if I wanted to correct it. I said not yet. I wrote the date on the motel notepad under the other 2. January 5th, January 8th, January 12th. 3 dates, and every single one of them before the surgery that was supposed to have caused all of this. I called the non-emergency line on Tuesday, and a woman explained what a civil standby is. An officer comes and keeps the peace while you collect your belongings. He doesn't decide who owns what. He doesn't make anyone leave. He stands there so that nothing happens. Officer Ruiz met me at the curb at 10:15. He was polite and enormous and completely uninterested in my feelings, which I found restful. He asked to see identification, and the deed copy from my safe deposit box, looked at both and said, "Okay, ma'am, this is your house. Let's get your things." Marissa opened the door before he knocked twice. I had been afraid she would shout. She didn't. She stepped back and let us in and stood with her arms folded by the coat closet, and she was polite to Officer Ruiz in the voice she uses on customer service lines, and she never once looked at me directly. Sophie was at school. Her husband's truck wasn't in the drive. I was glad about both. 5 weeks I'd been gone. It's not a long time. A house forgets you faster than that. My reading chair was in the corner under a stack of bath towels. There was a folding table in the dining room with a laptop and a cash box on it and a printer on a kitchen stool. The downstairs bedroom, which had been my sewing room and then my recovery room in the plan the hospital and I had made together, had her bed in it and her clothes on a rack and Sophie's sleeping bag rolled against the wall. Upstairs, my bed was stripped. My closet was half empty. 2 of the boxes on the landing had my winter things in them, folded, better than I'd have folded them. That's the part I couldn't put anywhere. She packed my sweaters properly. She'd used tissue paper on the good one. I collected what I'd come for. My medications, the printed list of them, the compression sleeve, the bath bench still in its box, a week of clothes, my glasses case, the folder from the hospital, and on the dining table, in a bank box that had my name written on the side in blue marker, were my papers. Not scattered, sorted. The deed folder was open. The homeowner's policy was out of its envelope with a sticky note on the declarations page. My bank statements were in a rubber band. The drawer of the filing cabinet in the hall stood open with nothing in it. I stood there and felt something arrive that I hadn't felt in all 5 weeks, and it wasn't grief, and it wasn't fear. I asked her, calmly, why my insurance policy was on the table. She said, because somebody has to know where things are. I said I knew where things were. She said, you were in surgery. On the sideboard there was a manila folder with the corner of the notary card showing, and beside it an envelope with "For Mom" written on it in her handwriting. I picked the envelope up. Marissa said, that's yours anyway. Officer Ruiz carried the box out to my car and said, in the driveway, that if I wanted her out of the house there was a process for that, and that it wasn't his, and I should talk to somebody who did it for a living. Then he said, it's a nice door, and he tapped the red frame with 2 fingers and left. I sat in the car for a long minute before I opened the envelope. Family care and property agreement, 11 pages. My name on the first line, and on the last page, a blank rule with my name typed under it, and beside it, a second blank for a notary stamp. Delia Combs has a corner office at a nonprofit on 6th Avenue with a poster about foreclosure prevention behind her desk and a plant that is definitely plastic. She's a housing counselor. She's been doing it 19 years. She read the whole thing without saying anything, which took 8 minutes, and I have rarely been so aware of a clock. Then she went through it with a pencil. Paragraph 2 granted Marissa and her household the right to reside at the property, rent-free, for a term of 5 years, renewable. Paragraph 4 named her household manager, with authority to pay bills from my accounts, to hire and dismiss any caregiver, and to authorize repairs and contractors. Paragraph 6 said the owner agreed to occupy the ground floor room designated by the manager or such residential care placement as the manager determined appropriate. Paragraph 9 set compensation for care and property management at $2,200 a month, payable from my accounts, beginning on signature. Paragraph 11 made it irrevocable for the full term, except by mutual written consent. Now, Delia said, and put the pencil down. Here's what this is not. It's not a deed. She doesn't get your house. Your name stays on that parcel, and it stays there whatever you sign. I said that was a relief. Don't be relieved yet. She turned to the last page. Here's what it is. It's a document that lets somebody decide which room you sleep in and pays her out of your account to do it. And it's written to be irrevocable, which no honest version of this ever is. She asked to see the notary card. She looked at it, and she looked at the discharge paperwork I'd brought because I bring everything, and then she turned both around on the desk so I could see them side by side. The notary appointment was for February 21st at 10 in the morning. My discharge was scheduled for 11. She wasn't going to ask you at the kitchen table, Delia said. She was going to ask you in a parking lot an hour before you found out you had nowhere to go. I said that couldn't be right, that it had to be a coincidence of scheduling, and I heard my own voice doing the thing I'd watched parents do across a counter for 31 years, explaining a date away because the alternative was a person. Delia, let me finish. Then she said, Mrs. Price, I've read 400 of these. They're never signed by people who've slept. That night I emptied the bank box onto the motel bed to sort my own papers back into order, and near the bottom, folded into thirds under my car registration, there was a letter that wasn't mine. It was addressed to my daughter's business at my street address. Final demand. A number I couldn't unsee. $38,600. Due in full by March 2nd. I didn't call her about it. I want to be clear about that because of what came later. I put the letter back where it had been, folded in thirds, and I did not call my daughter and say the number out loud. She called me. Thursday, at 7 in the morning, which is when she calls when she hasn't slept. We met at a pancake house on 6th. She'd already ordered coffee for both of us, which is a thing she does, deciding for you and calling it thoughtfulness. She looked terrible. I noticed her hands first, the way you notice your child's hands your whole life. You went to a lawyer, she said, a housing counselor. That's a lawyer with a worse office. I asked her to tell me the truth about January, and to my surprise, she did. Not gently and not all at once, but she did. She lost the Kirkland account in October and the property management contract in November, and those two were 60% of the business. There was a van loan. There were 3 credit lines she'd opened in the business name, and 1 she'd opened in her own, and a merchant advance she'd taken in the summer that took a cut of every deposit before it ever landed. Their landlord in Parkland had sent the letter in December, not renewing, out by the end of February. "We had 31 days," she said, "and you had a surgery, and there is a whole house sitting there with 2 people's worth of furniture and 1 person in it." I asked her if she was going to sell it. She looked genuinely offended. "God, Mom. No. I don't want your money. I wanted to stop paying somebody else's mortgage while I dug out of this." And there it was. She didn't want the house sold. She wanted the house run. She wanted the bills in her name and the rooms assigned and the decisions made, and she wanted it before I had a chance to say no in a way she couldn't get around. "You were going to be in that room by summer anyway," she said. "You know that, right? The stairs, the knee, the other knee. You want me to wait until you fall and then be the one who has to fix it with no authority to fix anything? You could have asked me. I have asked you things my whole life." She turned her cup a quarter turn on the saucer. "I asked you for a plan when Dad died. You said not yet. I asked you about long-term care insurance 3 years ago. You said not yet. I asked you in October if I could move in for 6 months, and you laughed and said the sewing room was a disaster. I didn't remember that last one, and I have thought about it since, and I believe her." "So you decided," I said. "Somebody had to." I asked her, and my voice did not do what I wanted it to do, whether she had ordered the locks before my surgery. She didn't lie. "That's the strangest mercy in this whole story." She said, "Yes," and then she said, "because I knew if I did it after, you'd have talked me out of it in 10 minutes, and we'd all still be sitting there in March with nothing decided." The waitress came, and neither of us had touched the eggs. At the door, in the cold, with her keys already in her hand, Marissa said the only thing she has ever said to me that I have not been able to forgive on the same day I heard it. "If you throw us out in February, don't sit by the window on Sunday. Sophie's not coming." Dale Furness came out on the 28th with my deed copy, my driver's license, and a letter from Delia in his folder, and he changed the locks on my house in 40 minutes. 2 exterior deadbolts, 1 entry set, 1 garage side door, $410. He gave me 4 keys on a paper tag and said, "You want the other party to have one?" I said yes. He waited a second, in case I wanted to think about it. I'd already thought about it. On the drive over, I'd worked out exactly what it would feel like to stand in my hallway holding all 4 keys, and what it would feel like to be my daughter, coming up a walk to a door that wouldn't open. I knew the weight of it precisely. I had been carrying it for a week. So I put 1 key on the hall table with a note that said, "This is yours. The notice is still coming. Both of those things are true." That's what I mean when I say I was trying not to win. I moved back in on the last day of February. Marissa stayed downstairs. We shared a kitchen and a hallway and a thermostat for 8 days, and I don't recommend it to anyone. Nadia came 3 mornings a week from an agency in Fife. She'd been a nurse in Chisinau, and now she does home care for $11 over minimum, and she is worth 6 times that. She set up the shower rail, made me do the stair drill with her behind me until I stopped holding my breath, and cooked enough soup on Wednesdays to get me to Saturday. $460 a week. Between the motel, the locks, the agency, the rail, the ride service, and the process server, that spring cost me a little under $3,900 out of an account I had been treating as the last thing I'd ever have to worry about. And here's what I learned with Nadia's hand 2 inches off my back on the 4th stair. The physical therapist's discharge summary, the one nobody in my family asked to read, said I was cleared for stairs with a rail at 6 weeks and full weight bearing at 8. I wasn't a woman who needed her rooms assigned to her. I was a woman who needed a rail and a ride to therapy on Tuesdays. That's a small fact, and it undid the entire argument. The house was quiet in a way I hadn't heard before. Sophie came up the stairs once, in her socks, and sat on the end of my bed and told me about a girl in her class who could touch her elbows behind her back. And then her mother called her from the bottom of the stairs, and she went. I made a rule for myself in that room, and I kept it through every week of this. I would not say a single word to that child about her mother. Not one. Not a sigh, not a look, not a, "Your mom is going through a lot right now." If a 9-year-old was going to lose something in this, it wasn't going to be handed to her by me. The notice went out on the 6th of March. Delia helped me write it, and a process server delivered it at 4 in the afternoon on a Friday. 20 days to vacate. My name at the bottom, printed and signed. I was upstairs when he knocked. I heard my daughter's voice through the floor, and then I heard nothing at all, which was worse. She was gone in 4 days. She did it while I was at physical therapy on Tuesday, which I understood, and which still knocked the wind out of me when I came home to it. The downstairs room was empty and swept. The folding table was gone. There was a dust rectangle on the floor where the printer stool had been, and one of Sophie's hair elastics on the windowsill. The key I'd left her was on the hall table on top of the note I'd written, turned face down. They went to her husband's cousin in Puyallup, a finished basement with an outside entrance, and I only know that because Ruth told me. Marissa blocked my number the same afternoon. 2 days later, I stopped being able to see Sophie's school pictures on her page. I want to be honest about the week that followed, because if I skip it, none of the rest is worth anything. I sat in a clean, quiet house that was entirely mine, and I could not eat a meal in it. I took a cab to therapy on Thursday and paid $26 each way. I cried in the produce section at the Safeway on Union in front of a display of tangerines, and a young man in an apron asked if I needed to sit down, and I said, "No thank you, I'm fine," which is the most priced thing anyone has ever said. The family did what families do. My cousin Denise sent a message to 11 people saying she hoped everyone was proud of themselves. Ruth called and said, "Elle, she has a 9-year-old in a basement." And I said, "She has a basement, Ruth." In February, she had 31 days and no basement at all, and my sister was quiet, because that was true, and neither of us liked that it was true. Somebody wrote that I'd chosen a house over my daughter. That one I read 4 times. Here's what I kept coming back to, at 2 in the morning, with the furnace ticking. Every single person telling me to fold was telling me to fold for the same reason. Because folding is what I do. They weren't asking me to be kind. They were asking me to be predictable. On the Monday, I called the mediation center in the county building and asked what it cost and how you begin. I did not cancel the notice. I want that on the record too. I asked for a table instead of a courtroom, and I kept the notice exactly where it was, because a request you can withdraw the moment somebody cries isn't a boundary, it's a mood. Then I spent 4 days deciding what to bring to that table. I laid everything out on the dining room table where her folding table had been. The locksmith work order. The scanned authorization with authorized family property manager in her handwriting. The invoice with the notes line. The utility change dated January 8th. The letter from the real estate office about the walkthrough on January 12th. The 11 pages of the agreement, unsigned. The notary card. The county record. My discharge summary and the physical therapist clearance. And at the end of the table, in its own pile, the things I had that would have finished her. The final demand letter with the number on it. 2 credit statements that had come to my address. The letter from her landlord in Parkland. Enough, if I'd wanted, to hand around a family group message and never be argued with by any of those people again. I sat with that pile for a long time on the Wednesday night. I'm not going to pretend I didn't compose the message. I wrote it. I got as far as choosing which line to lead with. Then I thought about Sophie at 19, finding it. Everything in that second pile answered a question nobody had asked. It didn't prove she planned the lockout. It only proved she was drowning, and I already knew that, and telling 40 people wouldn't get my hallway back. So I put it in a drawer, and I have never taken it out, and Marissa doesn't know to this day that I had it. Delia said something to me on the phone that week that I've kept. She said, "Bring what proves the thing you're actually claiming. Anything past that isn't evidence, it's temper." On the Friday, the mediation center called. My daughter had agreed to 1 session. 1, she'd told them, and she wanted it in writing that agreeing wasn't admitting anything. March 25th, 10 in the morning, a conference room on the 4th floor. The mediation center is on the 4th floor of a county building with a water pitcher that sweats onto a paper coaster. Frances Odell has done this work for 22 years, and she talks like a woman who has heard every version of every family and is still willing to hear yours. She set the ground rules. No interrupting, no history older than the matter at hand. Anyone can leave. Marissa came with her husband. He sat with his coat still on for the first 20 minutes. I went first because Frances asked me to describe what I wanted, not what had happened. That's a good trick, and it saved me from making a speech. I said I wanted my house, my mail, my accounts, and my keys. I said I wanted to keep being my granddaughter's grandmother. And I said I was not going to sign anything that let another adult decide which room I slept in. Marissa said she'd acted in an emergency. She said it well. She talked about the landing and the ice on the back steps in December and the fall in the rehabilitation gym, and if you'd walked in at that moment, you'd have thought you were listening to a daughter who'd done a hard, loving thing badly. Frances let her finish. Then she said, "Can we put the dates on the board? I find it settles arguments about what people meant." She wrote them as we gave them. I had mine in order because they'd been in order on my dining table for a week. January 5th, locks ordered, sound lock and key, Work order in the room. January 8th. Utility account contact changed to Marissa's number. Sometime that first week, a call to a real estate office in Fircrest. January 12th. A market analysis walkthrough of my house. With me in it, packing. January 16th. My surgery. January 20th. Locks installed. I was in a hospital bed with a wound drain. February 4th. I lost my balance in the therapy gym and went down on my hip. They called my emergency contact, which was my daughter, and I was fine, and it was written up as an unwitnessed near fall, and I was walking the parallel bars again on the 6th. February 21st, 10 in the morning. Notary appointment. February 21st, 11 in the morning. My discharge. Frances stood back and looked at the board the way you look at a photograph that came out different than you expected. "Marissa," she said, "help me. The locks are on the door 2 weeks before the fall in the gym. What is the emergency on January 5th? My daughter said the emergency had been building for a year. I understand. I'm asking about the 5th. Nobody said anything. The picture dripped onto the coaster. Then Frances asked the question I hadn't known how to ask for a month. She said, "What was supposed to happen at 10 o'clock on February 21st? Marissa said the notary was for convenience. She said she'd blocked out the morning anyway. For your mother's signature? For the agreement, yes. And your mother's discharge was at 11. Yes. So she would have signed it before she came home. That was the idea. And if she'd read it and said no? And my daughter, who is not stupid, and who I think had been holding this since the 5th of January with nowhere to put it, said, then she'd have found out what the situation was, and she'd have signed it in the car." Her husband turned his head. "That's not what you told me," he said. "You told me she agreed. In January. You said she agreed and we were waiting on the paperwork. I have watched a lot of people take in bad news across a counter. It's always the same. The face goes still first, and the rest follows a second later." Marissa didn't answer him. She looked at the table, and there it was, laid out in dry erase marker, with a mediator's neat handwriting and no drama in it at all. She hadn't panicked and changed the locks. She'd built a room with one door in it. Take away the keys, take away the mail, take away the pills and the coat and the phone charger, put a woman at the end of a 5-week hospital stay on a sidewalk at 4 in the afternoon with a transport driver waiting, and then hand her 11 pages and a pen. Nobody had to force me to sign. I was supposed to be grateful for the chair. I have thought about that for a long time since. And here's the part I can't set down. It would have worked. If the invoice hadn't come in my own mail with a notes line on it, I'd have signed. Not because I'm foolish, because I was tired and it was cold, and my daughter would have been the only person in the world offering me a bed. "Eleanor," Frances said, "do you want to respond?" I did. I'd written 3 sentences on an index card, and I read the first one, and then I put the card down because it wasn't going to be enough. I said, "Before I say what I need, I want to say what I did." I told them about the $1,106 and the 3 months of rent I asked her not to mention to her husband, which was the worst thing I did in this story, and I did it out of love, which doesn't help. I said I'd handed her a key and a code and an account and my whole family a sentence at Thanksgiving about how someday this would all be hers. I said, "I taught you that the way to get help from me was to be in a crisis. Then I acted shocked when you built one." Marissa's mouth went, just slightly. She had not expected that. "But hear the rest," I said. "Everything I gave you, I gave. That's what a gift is. It doesn't turn into a right because I gave it more than once." Then I said my 3 things, and I didn't dress them up. The house is mine and it stays mine, and I will not sign an agreement that puts anyone between me and my own accounts. I will pay for my own help, and I will choose who comes into my house. And I will not trade money for Sophie in either direction, ever. She is not a payment and she is not a punishment. And if anyone in this room uses her as one, we're done at this table and we'll be somewhere with a docket number instead. Frances wrote it all down. We were there 4 hours, and most of it wasn't dramatic. It was Frances asking whether $60 a month was realistic, and my daughter saying it was, and her husband saying it wasn't, and then the 2 of them agreeing on 40 for 6 months and 60 after that. The agreement runs 3 pages. I've read it more times than I've read anything except the 11 pages that didn't get signed. She returns all keys, the garage remote, and the alarm fob, and she is removed as a contact on the utility account, the homeowner's policy, and the bank. That took me 4 phone calls, and one very patient young woman at the credit union who asked me twice if I was sure. She repays the direct cost of the lockout. The 7 nights at the motel, the locksmith, the process server, the cab fare to therapy, $1,440, at $40 a month to start. I did not ask for the $22,000 from the 9 years before. That was mine to have given, and I gave it, and I'd have been asking her to repay my own habit. Visits are twice a month, arranged a week ahead, at my house or the park on Proctor. She does not have a key. She does not need one. Nobody is going to be standing outside a door in this family again, on either side of it, wondering how they got there. And I kept one thing that surprised everybody in that room, including me. Marissa is still my medical proxy. Delia thought I was making a mistake. Ruth said outright that I'd lost my mind, but the paperwork we wrote is narrow as a wire. If I can't speak for myself, my daughter decides about my care and nothing else. Not my house, not my money, not where I live afterward. Frances added the sentence herself. Here's why. My daughter did a calculated, self-serving thing to a woman who trusted her, and she did it while packing my sweaters in tissue paper. Both of those are her. If I'm ever unconscious in a hospital in Tacoma, I want the one who knows I don't want a feeding tube and who will sit there until somebody comes. Love isn't the thing I had to take back. Permission was. Painful relief is the only name I have for how that room felt at the end. Nobody hugged anybody. Marissa signed and stood and said, "Is that it?" And Frances said yes, and my daughter walked out ahead of her husband. 4 days later, Ruth came by with a card in an envelope that had a sticker on the back holding it shut. Dear Grandma, I hope your knee is 100%. Ruth says you are doing your exercises. I made this at Ruth's house, and she is mailing it because that is the rule right now. From Sophie, there was a drawing of a house with a red door and too many windows. I put it on the refrigerator, where it still is. She came on the second Saturday in May at 2 o'clock, because 2 o'clock was what the calendar said. She knocked. That's the whole thing, really. My daughter stood on the porch of the house she grew up in and knocked, and waited, and did not reach for a handle. I opened the door and my knee did not hurt at all, which felt like a joke somebody was making at my expense. She had an envelope, $40 in cash, and a receipt book from the drugstore with the first line filled in, because she wanted a record and so did I. She's seeing a financial counselor at the agency on 6th, 2 doors down from Delia, which neither of us has commented on. She's doing 6 sessions with somebody through her husband's insurance. She told me both of those quickly, like a report, and then stopped, because I think she'd expected the telling to buy her something, and it hadn't. Sophie was in the yard with a jump rope, counting out loud, the way 9-year-olds do when they want you to hear the number. Marissa stood in my kitchen and looked at the card on the refrigerator. She said, "Are we okay?" I could have made that easy. 40 years of practice, and every muscle I have wanted to. I said, "We're on the calendar for the first Saturday in June. That's what we are right now. It's not nothing." She nodded. Her eyes went red, and she didn't let it get further than that, which is a thing she got from me, and we stood in my kitchen for a minute with the window open and a child counting in the yard. They left at 4. She said goodbye at the door, on the outside of it, and I watched them to the car, because that's what my mother did, and I've never been able to stop. That evening, I sat at the table with a small paper bag from the pharmacy. There's a medical alert button in it, the kind on a cord that I picked out myself off a website while eating a sandwich. $240 a year, and it works in the shower. I did not ask anyone's opinion about it, which was the entire point of buying it. I took my old brass key out of the dish by the door, the one with the worn edges that opened that red door for 29 years and doesn't open anything now. I put it on a new ring next to the button, and I set the ring on the table where I could see it. It doesn't open anything, I know that. I keep it because I want to remember exactly what it cost to find out that the door was mine. If you've got someone in your life who keeps deciding things for you and calling it care, look at the dates, not the words, the dates. And if this one landed somewhere close to home, stay with me a while. There are more of these, and I'd be glad of your company.